Great sight. There's the city in the background. What a sight. Guns gone and they're away.
Last year, on Saturday the 26th of December, 115 yachts set off on the 54th Sydney to Hobart Yacht Race. Sailing on Sword of Orion was Steve Coolmar, a two-time race winner and on his 17th Hobart.
Sydney to Hobart is the major event in the sailing calendar, and it's a tough race, and it's sort of become a sort of a tradition, you know.
It's uncomfortable, it's wet, it's cold, it's miserable, and it has to be endured, and that's called going to Hobart.
In the Sydney to Hobart, just getting to Hobart is a badge of honour, even if it's only for the so-called quiet little drink at the finish. On the vintage yacht Winston Churchill, the chief helmsman was John Stanley.
You try and be competitive to a point, but the boat's got its limitations, so you're really going along to enjoy the race and enjoy the camaraderie.
You know, there's that feeling that we're sort of here to sort of conquer this mountain, and one way or another we will.
The feeling of having achieved something significant in a personal sense when you arrive in Hobart makes it a very satisfying experience, and I think to a large extent that's what draws people back year in, year out.
3, 2, 6, 8!
Sailing with the yachts and representing the race organisers, the Cruising Yacht Club of Australia, was the tall ship Young Endeavour, known as Telstra Control.
Well, I think the actual vessel is always called the mothership. I find it so great because it's a direct link with so many of the people that I've actually sailed with or would like to have sailed with.
A tuning call before going ahead with the sched and the weather.
3 times a day in scheduled briefings called skeds, Lou Carter and the other volunteers on Young Endeavour keep in touch with the fleet, reading out a weather report and checking off each yacht's position.
I think it's quite an honour that the yachties place their trust and honour in me with their lives.
There's the Brindabella cruise sitting up on the side.
That first afternoon, as the race began, the forecast predicted a southerly change would hit the fleet during the night.
630 miles to go, and we've got some pretty savage weather coming up down the track. Just how they
But an hour later, the Bureau of Meteorology issued a storm warning for Bass Strait on the next day, Sunday. Few yachtsmen gave it a second thought. Under normal conditions, Bass Strait would be a 2-day sail away.
There was nothing really to put us off guard. We were tucked in, and I don't think anyone at that stage would have thought that what was to happen, within the next 24, 28 hours or whatever.
But within that time, there'd be what forecasters call an extreme event, a once-in-20-years storm. The question is, could it have been predicted? There's no yacht race that takes more strategic planning or money than the America's Cup. When it comes to weather, a leading American syndicate has employed a world expert, Roger Badham. Badham's last job was advising some of the Sydney to Hobart's most serious competitors. 4 days before the race, he explained to his clients that 3 international weather computers were all predicting a deep low pressure system would form near Tasmania. The trouble was, each computer put the low in a different place.
The low was definitely going to form, but was it south of Tasmania, east of Tasmania, or in Bass Strait? That was the big question mark, and how intense would it be? So it was, there were quite a number of schools of thought there from the numerical models as to exactly how the situation was going to develop. It was going to happen, but where and exactly how intense, not too sure.
Thanks, Bruce.
In Sydney, 2 days before the race, The organisers, the Cruising Yacht Club of Australia, held a compulsory weather briefing for competitors.
This is for tonight, good old Thursday, Christmas Eve. That's this prefrontal trough.
A forecaster from the Bureau of Meteorology mentioned the different computer models, but he didn't go into detail.
Yesterday, Gasp and EC were highly divergent.
Many yachtsmen say they left the briefing feeling confused. The Bureau of Meteorology refused to be interviewed for this program.
What goes on there is anybody's business, but...
I mean, the Hobart's a very tough race, a very, very tough race. I don't think there's a tougher ocean race in the world. And you've got to say that generally the weather information available isn't up to the standards.
Whose responsibility do you think that should be?
I think it's a combination. If the clubs want to run this race and they want absolute support for it, they should go further, as the Weather Bureau should go further as well.
Most competitors dismissed the computer predictions. But on the day of the race, an hour after the start, two of the computers began to show a much clearer picture. They both predicted a storm would form inside Bass Strait. They both predicted it would be severe.
I contacted a yachting colleague and told him of that the low was actually going to form and that there was going to be some quite nasty winds later Sunday afternoon and probably Sunday evening, and that I thought a lot of the yachts would be damaged.
Roger Badham was so concerned that he did something he'd never done before. He phoned the yachts he'd been advising and left messages warning them.
I was concerned, mainly in terms of, you know, just looking after themselves in a situation like that.
By early morning on the 27th of December, the second day of the race, the low pressure system wasn't just a prediction, it was a reality. As the yachts headed south, the low and the storm formed in Bass Strait, just to the east of Wilson's Promontory. By 9 in the morning, wind readings at the prom were averaging 79 knots and gusting up to 92, around 170 kilometres an hour.
Now, I can only recall similar sorts of wind speeds at Wilson's Promontory on a few occasions, mostly in wintertime. And, you know, that is a very significant reading. It's certainly in the top 1% of all readings.
That morning, the high wind readings were broadcast on coastal radio. But many of the yachts, waiting for the scheduled weather forecast later that afternoon, didn't hear them. The storm that was forming was intense. In other parts of Australia, it would have been called a cyclone. By mid-morning, as the low-pressure system deepened, the leading yachts were racing into Bass Strait. Strong winds and a strong current had sent the fleet south twice as fast as usual. The storm and the race were about to converge in the most dangerous place imaginable.
You have strong currents running south and gale to storm strength winds coming travelling to the north. When they face each other, the sea just peaks into a huge swell.
That's probably one of the most unpredictable places in the world for weather conditions. So that's why you actually need your sort of knowledge of the area and your common sense. If the weather is bad, you turn around.
In Bass Strait by this stage, and the seas were building the whole time, and the seas were just getting bigger and bigger, and the tops were blowing off them, and the conditions, you know, became incredibly treacherous.
It was horrible. It built ever so quickly that you could just watched the wind speed indicator go from 20 to 30 to 40 to 50 to 60, and it sat at 60 and 65 and stayed solid there. And we thought, okay, this is the 65 we were expecting, and we can live with this because that's will generally hang in for maybe an hour and then tail out. And then it built to 70, 71, and then it was gusting up to 78, and then one of the guys saw 80 on the clock. We're going, this is far more than we ever anticipated.
On the two yachts, Ranger and Sword of Orion, concerns like the low pressure system were deepening. Did you ever think about going back?
We discussed our situation on a regular basis.
And?
We talked about retiring earlier in the race. It's always difficult to know, and you've probably read in the papers, plenty of people have said, it's safer to keep going to sail into the sea conditions. The reality was it made little difference.
We'd been in that, I suppose, for about half an hour when we decided that it would probably be sensible to make a radio call and just let them know that the wind speed was building beyond 65 and that it was actually a hell of a lot more than anyone had really anticipated.
And what time is that?
I can't be absolutely sure, but probably about 12:30, 1:15 in the afternoon.
Ranger, worried about smaller boats behind it, reported its conditions to Telstra Control. And did you do anything with that message, or were you waiting?
No, I was waiting for the sced. That's something... I mean, you don't relay all of these... I mean, these yachties are aware of it. They can tell by the sea conditions.
At that time, many of the yachts wouldn't have been listening to their radios. But Ranger's message, had it been widely heard, would have come at a crucial moment. A cluster of small boats was about to reach Bass Strait. Among them was a Tasmanian yacht, Business Post Naiad.
We looked at the weather report and we thought it was probably only going to be 45, 55 knots. And up around those speeds when you were in for a wet slog of a night, but we felt quite comfortable and confident that we would cope with that.
If you'd known what was ahead, what would you have done?
Head back to Eden.
When would you have needed to know that?
We would have had to have headed back to Eden at between 12 and 1 o'clock.
Around the leading small yachts, the barometer plummeted a massive 100 points in less than an hour.
I have never seen conditions like it, and I never want to see conditions like it again. You experience something called whiteout, which means that the sky goes white and the tops are blowing off the waves and everything's coming in at you horizontally like bullets, and you know, you can't look at it. It's so painful.
Well, I guess if you can imagine it pouring with rain and then sitting on top of your car and being driven along the road at 160 kilometres an hour, that's how much wind there would have been. Only the car would be steady, whereas on the boat's pitching and rocking as well. It's quite unreal to even imagine something like that, let alone be in it.
It didn't take long for the first yacht to strike trouble. Team Jaguar, a 19-metre yacht from Sydney, broke its mast.
We had a report from Team Jaguar, and they'd actually been rolled over, and they had lines caught around their prop.
That morning in nearby Eden, most of the trawlers had decided the sea was too dangerous for fishing. Now one was requested to go out and rescue Team Jaguar.
I called my skipper. He didn't really think that it was good to be out there, but there were 17 people. He would go.
The rescue of Team Jaguar would end up taking the trawler 15 hours. During the night, it would also use valuable time on Telstra Control radio.
You're risking damage to your vessel and your own lives. And quite often the yachting community, or a high percentage of the yachting community, don't appear to appreciate the efforts and the costs that have been outlaid to rescue them or to tow them in.
Going now to the weather.
At 2 that afternoon, The whole fleet was listening when Telstra Control began its scheduled briefing.
Here is the weather.
The weather forecast was for winds of 45 to 55 knots and seas of 5 to 7 metres.
Southeast.
Well, the weather forecast at 2 o'clock wasn't what was happening where we were. It might have been accurate for somewhere, but it wasn't accurate for where the fleet was entering.
I've never known such a discrepancy. I've never seen such a discrepancy. I wasn't prepared to countenance such a discrepancy. I must say, in this day and age when we can put man on the moon, that we would get a closer forecast than that.
The top wind speed that we recorded was 92 knots, which is in kilometres about 175 to 180. 80 and 90 knots is just not ever been seen in that sort of those waters by sailors who went down there. I don't think that probably any of them had been in those conditions in that part of the ocean.
Would you have gone into it?
No one would dream of had anyone known that was going to happen.
Sayonara, are you there?
It was only toward the end of the scheduled briefing that one yacht finally gave the fleet a clear warning. It was Sword of Orion.
When we got to letter S and I gave my latitude and longitude, I then said, as a matter of safety, because it certainly wasn't a matter of racing, a matter of safety, I need to report that the weather conditions we're experiencing are not those that were forecasted. And I just reported that we had wind conditions up to 78 knots.
Only one yacht very nearby offered more information. It was Yendi's.
We just confirmed that the weather patterns we were experiencing, which was roughly the same position in Bass Strait, was identical to what he was saying.
Sword of Orion had raised the alarm. Yachtsmen began pulling into shelter, but many weren't sure of the safest course. One of those, in his 27th Sydney to Hobart, was Peter Joubert.
At the point when I heard Sword of Orion say they had 70 knots, I swallowed very hard. And we were then south of Gabo. We were entering Bass Strait, and I wasn't sure if turning back would be as easy as trying to carry on.
But Sword of Orion wasn't just giving a warning. It was trying to decide whether or not to turn back and hoping for information.
We purposely informed the fleet of the conditions, hopeful that somebody in front of us may well have said, I think it was 7th or 8th or 9th in fleet, somewhere around there at the stage. So there were, apart from the two maxi boats, both of which had radios, and one of them came up in the sked at a pretty similar time to our own. I think it would have been nice to have known what they were experiencing, because they were about 60 miles in front of us.
Why do you think you didn't get more information?
I can't comment on that. I don't know why. I mean, some may classify it as outside assistance, outside the rules, outside the guidelines. That may be so, but I think when you're sailing in survival conditions, I think you should help each other.
Little the wiser, Sword of Orion reorganised its crew, chose a wave and turned around. It was a fateful decision.
We were just without information, and it would have been lovely to have it, and had we had it, we might have gone a different direction. We certainly wouldn't have turned back if we'd known how the weather was actually going to go. What actually happened to us, we went back into the worst of it.
1500.
The South Australian yacht, Stand Aside, didn't make it to the end of the sked.
All okay, you?
Of course, with our boat being called VC Offshore Stand Aside instead of Stand Aside, it was one of the last to actually come up. And we were getting down the letters and everybody's going, well, we're okay, things are fine. And I'm just about to say, well, we're okay as well. And somebody shouts out from up top, watch out, there's a big wave coming. And next thing, it just swung it over.
And the broken water then hit the side of the boat, and actually how we tipped, whether we straight rolled or got picked up and dumped down the wave, you don't really know, because the next second you're in the water and your brain just says, well, hang on, I'm in the water, it's the middle of Bass Strait, what do I do here? Yeah.
Stand aside called Mayday.
Roger, and confirm you were the yacht that called Mayday call earlier on, over? Yes, it is. Over. Roger, stand by.
The Mayday was picked up by the ABC helicopter and a small yacht called Sienna.
We waited to hear if any other yachts were closer than we were. We didn't hear any other yachts respond. We checked our position and we were very, very close to him, and we made our way to lend assistance.
Sienna, this is search aircraft echoing straight Foxtrot.
Until then, Sienna was running second in its division. Turning back was the end of its chances in the race.
We have the boat in sight.
I have a legal obligation to render assistance. Also, I have a moral obligation, and I would hope that if I was in distress, someone would come and rescue me.
Sienna found Stand Aside, mastless, with its cabin ripped open and taking water. In danger itself, Sienna tacked up and down for an hour, waiting to hear from a rescue helicopter. Then Sienna's helmsman struck trouble.
He called wave, as we do, and then you just get your arm around a winch or whatever you can get it around, and then this tonnage of water just comes straight over you and tries to throw you out of the boat.
As rescuers arrived, Sienna retreated with one of its crewmen seriously injured. But by now, calls for assistance were flooding in on the radio.
You could just listen to the radio. There were people breaking in over the sked. You know, discipline was being lost in the sked, and there were boats calling retire and needing help and man overboard right through a sked. I mean, that sort of stuff doesn't usually happen, so it was quite clear that there was sort of chaos happening.
On the control boat, following the fleet, Lou Carter decided to remind yachtsmen of the race rules. In particular, that responsibility for each boat rests with its skipper. What does that rule mean?
Well, it's a rule, but B, it's an ethos, if you like. Its roots stem from the fact that once you're out at sea, every boat or vessel is an entity in itself that needs to rely on its own available resources to cope with whatever it experiences.
They read out the skipper's responsibility rule, but gave no advice as to what they thought skippers should do.
What do you think of that?
I think yacht clubs, racing committees should bear more responsibility. They certainly do with smaller boats. They cancel races when winds get too great. But there's a real gung-ho attitude with regard to ocean racing. Press on regardless.
At sea on the Young Endeavour, Lou Carter says race organisers gave him no instructions.
The CYC Royal Yacht Club leave that then entirely at our discretion to pass on any safety warnings that we feel that we should implement.
They don't contact you?
No, they don't. No, they don't.
And
they're listening at all times. Probably, they've usually got a 24-hour watch. We're on a 24-hour watch, and either Hobart or Sydney would be listening in as well.
So they would have heard this, but they didn't intervene?
No, they didn't intervene at all. No.
Oh, Lou's a radio operator. He's not. He's an operative in the scheme of things. His job is to man the radio and communicate messages from one to the other. I mean, he doesn't have an organisational responsibility.
Wasn't he making decisions, for example, decisions about reading the warning for skippers?
That's part of his procedure. That's not a decision as to whether he reads it or doesn't read it. That's part of his procedure.
Who was making the decisions then?
But the decisions are made through the procedural process that's in place.
What's that?
To communicate the available information to the fleet.
Sydney? Where is it? Where are the decisions coming from?
There are no decisions that are being made by race control during the process of the race, other than decisions. But there aren't. I mean, the role of race control during the course of the race is to provide the best possible information that is helpful and useful to the competitors out in the fleet.
If the control boat wasn't making decisions, it seems the Cruising Yacht Club in Sydney wasn't making them either. Minutes of a debriefing held after the race for police and rescuers note that at 4 o'clock that Sunday, a former race director, Greg Halls, contacted Peter Bush, who was running the club's situation room in Sydney. Greg Halls says he warned Peter Bush that the race was going to experience severe difficulties. He was answered, "They'll be right." Peter Bush has denied using those words, but confirmed to Four Corners that at that stage he had no evidence of how bad things would get. It took another 3 hours for Peter Bush to call Greg Halls back and ask for assistance.
Now, of course, once the weather events turned out to be at the intensity that they did, I mean, at that stage it's too late to be doing anything about it or saying, couldn't the club have done more?
Calling off the race wouldn't have changed the weather conditions. You've just got to get out of there. Not getting in there would have been the very best thing we could have done. And not getting in there means that we would have gone wider. And we would have gone wider if we'd known more about the weather.
Well, there is provision for us to stop the race. I mean, we can actually do it.
But have you ever done it?
No, we haven't. And the point of not stopping it, or the reason why we never have, is because at what point do you decide to stop it? At what point do you decide that it is no longer safe for everybody to continue?
By late afternoon, rescuers were winching the last men from Stand Aside. Nearby, another and worse disaster was beginning. The vintage yacht Winston Churchill, with 9 men on board, was rapidly sinking.
Felt like that the wave basically picked the boat up and then threw it sideways at a 45-degree angle into the trough of the wave in front. So you're picking up, the wave's picking up 25-tonne of boat and just hurling it sideways. The water pressure then came across the deck, smashed the 3 windows in front of me, and then the water came across and pinned me to inside the coach house. And then I could hear the boys yelling out to me for help. So I went upstairs and they'd been thrown around the backstay. We've got what they call a split backstay on the boat. So the force of that water had thrown them both out overboard, around the backstay, and basically sort of suspended them in the air. Their feet was about 2 foot off the deck. So that was a big wave. That was a big wave, and so I knew we had to get the pumps going pretty fast. So in the time it took to get the buoys untangled and then to sort that out, and I asked Richard to go down and turn the motor on. In that timing, by the time I got down there, the water was up probably 14 inches. I don't know how much water went down that hatch. And the batteries being on that side of the boat, the water was up to the top of the battery. So when he turned the motor on, we only got about 5 seconds of the motor and it stopped. And then I knew that we were in a problem, had a big problem.
Chopper, go ahead, details of your emergency, over.
ABC Chopper, we are hold. We are taking water rapidly. We cannot get the motor started to start the pumps, over.
Roger, how many on board, over?
Nine.
could see just from where the deck had been smashed out, the water was pouring in there, that we were in a big problem. So the boys went up on deck and we got the life rafts up and then planned what we would do from there.
The Winston Churchill sank within 15 minutes. A helicopter sent to find it never made it. It was almost immediately diverted to another crisis.
We had this normal 60-foot sea, and suddenly it had about another 30 feet on top of it, and it just turned us over. The mast went into the water. People in the cockpit were floating in stillness, and then I heard we had a man overboard, so I called Mayday on the radio.
Luckily for that chap and for us all, there was a chopper in the area, and it heard the conversation that I was having, and it was probably 15 to 20 minutes in flying time away from it.
The chap had been pulled back to the stern of the boat on the end of his lifeline. 3 people had tried to lift him out, couldn't. Apparently he put his arms up and slipped right out of his jacket, out of his harness, and went floating off behind the yacht.
How much chance did you give him at that time?
I thought he was gone.
Miraculously, in the wild seas, a helicopter spotted the man and pulled him to safety. But by late afternoon, at least 16 yachts and more than 150 yachtsmen were in trouble.
I mean, it was a huge learning curve in a very short time. You know, up to 16 targets, if you like, going into the first night after a few hours of daylight only is a pretty precarious situation.
One call would finish and the phone would go again, there'd be another call. Not always for distress situations, there was also calls from the yachties offering assistance, which was marvellous to see.
But soon, 2 more yachts, Sword of Orion and Business Post Naiad, would be in serious trouble.
It just sounded like you were in a massive hailstorm in the boat because the spume and the rain was hitting the hull of the boat that hard that it was just like being in a house that's having a massive hailstorm all the time. Very noisy and very, the wind shrieking through the rigging.
You've got wind howling and you've got a wave moving through at something like 70 or 80 kilometres an hour. So you've got to be reacting quickly, and that's coming and it sounds like a train coming. And so it's scary.
About 20 minutes after it turned back, Sword of Orion was rolled over. Its helmsman, English Olympic yachtsman Glyn Charles, was lost overboard.
I could hear the guy who'd been on deck with the driver, screaming for gear, and we were providing gear as fast as we could. But everybody was doing all they could to preserve the boat, to see if we could start motors, to see if we could do anything, to get messages out.
You would have needed help pretty quickly.
Yes, we needed help in a time frame that no one could deliver it.
Sword of Orion was taking water. Its mast was broken and its main aerial lost.
I would have called Mayday continuously until I lost my voice. I did it for 2.5 hours.
You're 85 miles off the coast. You're left in a pretty fearful state. The seas are still enormous. You're sitting there out of control.
Were there other boats in the area?
There was one other boat close by at the time. We actually did let off our flares to try and get his attention. It is, however, possible that he may not have seen us. The conditions were treacherous. At that particular time it was raining. The visibility was probably 300 metres.
According to skipper Rob Covey, the other boat passed by within about 150 metres. And though the Orion's crew could see the sailors aboard the passing yacht, they got no response to the 4 or 5 distress flares they fired.
What is it, do you think, that would prevent someone or stop someone from stopping in that situation? How can you explain it in terms of humankind?
Well, I guess you relate it to the fact that they may have spent months or even years preparing for this race. It's a great endeavour, something that they want desperately to achieve. The one thing they'd love to be able to say is, well, I did that tough 98 Hobart and got there. So there's a lot of sort of personal esteem and I guess somehow some sort of warmth or outcome from that.
I personally believe that there is a time when the prime consideration is not winning the yacht race but helping the people in need. And as far as I'm concerned, there was not enough, if there was any, yachts turning around to help fellow yachtsmen. There was 2 trawlers there on the spot. There were helicopters and Coast Guard and a lot of people not connected with the race, but I'm not aware of too many yachts helping any other yachtsmen.
A helicopter lifted 3 crew from Sword of Orion. But then the rescue became so dangerous that it had to be abandoned. That night, another boat in trouble called for help and didn't get it. Of all the yachts in the race, none felt more abandoned than Business Post Naiad.
We continued on changing sails down to our smallest sail that we had, which was a storm jib. That is all we had up until conditions deteriorated as such that the boat was going too quick for the conditions.
And I guess when the wind got to probably 80, 85 knots, that's when I became quite apprehensive, and we had to take the storm jib off, and then we were in the lap of the gods.
So we removed the sail off the boat and continued under bare poles. We were only doing that for about 15 minutes and we got rolled by a huge breaking wave.
Down below was pandemonium, just things were flung everywhere, and it was just chaos. The boat went dark as we were totally upside down and the windows were all underwater, and it just continued to roll and came alive the other way.
You didn't really have a lot of time to think about it. It was very horrendous. You went from daylight to pitch black dark as you rolled through the water, and you came up the other side and you had everything on top of you, so you still couldn't see, and you fought your way out from under that to go and help the guys on deck who were over the side of the boat.
How many?
There were 5 over the side of the boat at that time, all attached by lifelines.
3 men were injured. Naiad had taken on water, its deck was cracked, its mast broken and its aerial damaged. Naiad's mayday, too weak to reach Telstra control directly, was relayed on by another yacht, Yengi's.
And I think Danny, my navigator, was on the air for maybe an hour and a half, relaying their radio transmission to the escort vessel.
And what response was there that you could hear to the fact that you had let out a mayday?
I don't recall getting a response.
Mayday, mayday, mayday.
Naiad couldn't speak to Telstra control directly, but it could hear the control boat clearly.
Message for Telstra control.
Sometime later, via the relay, Telstra control asked if Naiad would downgrade its mayday.
They called back to see what our situation was. I indicated that our situation had stabilised. We were attempting to motor back. They then asked, was the mayday still in operation? Could it be downgraded? I indicated that I didn't want to downgrade it.
Why was that?
Because I still believed that we were in imminent danger. My reply to them was, I don't want to downgrade it, but if you want it downgraded, I would only downgrade it to a pan-pan, and that is as far as I was prepared to go.
Did you downgrade it?
I didn't definitively downgraded? No.
What did you hear back from them?
I don't know that I got a response to that either.
Four Corners has confirmed with the search authority that Naiad's Mayday was in fact treated as downgraded. But Peter Keats says he didn't know that.
At 8 o'clock that evening I requested a relay to Telstra Control or any boats in our vicinity that I would like a boat to stand by us during the hours of darkness, and I would like a helicopter to take at least 3 people off the boat. I said I have 3 people here who I consider should be relieved off the boat, if that is possible. The reply to that was, well, the reply I didn't get, I heard Telstra Control say we'll pass it on to Canberra.
What did they say to you?
They didn't say anything to us.
It would have been reassuring to have heard something.
Reassuring?
It would have increased the comfort level to have known that they knew where we were and what we were doing. I mean, we just felt that we probably weren't acknowledged that well.
Naiad listened helplessly as Telstra Control assisted with other rescues.
They were to some degree overwhelmed by the amount of radio traffic coming through, by the amount of boats calling for either assistance or requesting information regarding going back to Eden, what the situation was. They were trying to organise a rescue for another boat at that stage, between a fishing boat that was out there looking for a boat, and they were also trying to organise that.
That was Team Jaguar?
That was Team Jaguar, as I understand.
So there was a lot of chatter?
There was a lot of chatter.
Did any of it seem to relate to your call?
No.
The trawler's search for Team Jaguar would last till early the next morning. But after all the effort, Team Jaguar's skipper, Martin James, also a director of the Cruising Yacht Club, now says the yacht never needed urgent assistance. According to James, Team Jaguar and its 17 crew were never in imminent danger.
Did you hear in the night from Business Post Naiad?
No, I think from memory Business Post might have been out of radio contact.
Naiad's relay through Yendes lasted nearly 2 hours. But shortly after Naiad requested a boat to stand by it for the night, Yendes, about 4 hours sail away, dropped out of contact.
We thought everyone was okay. There were some people who had been hurt a little bit, and they were just relaying their position, the state of whatever, and that they needed help and things like that.
It's unclear whether any yachts were close enough to help, but Naiad's request was never answered. Later, 2 more yachts made brief radio contact, but also dropped out of range.
If you had heard in those conditions a boat asking for another boat to stand by it in your situation, what would you have done?
If a boat was in our vicinity and we could have offered help, we would have attempted to have stood by somehow. I don't know how, but we would have attempted to have done something.
In those conditions?
Yes, it would have been dangerous to do, but I don't know. And we would have attempted to have done it.
Would you expect that?
You can't expect people and other vessels to endanger themselves to help you, I don't think. If it's putting them at imminent risk, and they've got to look after their own safety first. They can't help you if they're sunk.
At 11 o'clock that night, Business Post Naiad was turned upside down by a giant wave.
Very scary. Very scary. It was all very quiet while the boat was upside down. All noise ceased. The motor was lost.
When the boat rolled back up again, there was a clamber to get on deck to see how the guys on deck had fared, and also to let some flares off and get the life rafts out. At that stage we had approximately a metre of water in the boat.
Yeah, we stayed upside down for some 4 or 5 minutes. I could hear Rob Matthews calling for Phil on deck. I didn't hear Phil reply.
Phil Skeggs couldn't escape his harness and drowned. Shortly afterwards, the skipper, Bruce Guy, had a massive heart attack and died. The crew bailed water for 3 hours. Around midnight, they saw a light in the sky.
Was there anything you could do to call for help?
Only let flares off.
By first light, the storm had moved away. Later that morning, the 7 survivors from Business Post Naiad were lifted off by helicopter. It wasn't till later that afternoon that rescuers found the 2 life rafts from the Winston Churchill. During the night and the storm, one raft lost 3 men overboard. After 40 hours, the rescue effort finally ended. In the days that followed, the survivors struggled home. As they did, some who'd helped in the rescue raised serious questions about how well race organisers had prepared for an ocean race that sent more than 1,000 yachtsmen into some of the world's most dangerous waters.
It's good to be back on land.
A debriefing for police and rescuers noted that before the race, organisers had not held the usual pre-race briefings. That police and coastal patrols had not been given race background or lists of yachts and competitors. And that at the height of the rescue, it had been difficult to get adequate information from the race organisers. Now, the Cruising Yacht Club is holding an inquiry into the Sydney to Hobart.
From the club's point of view, we are doing this for the sailing community. As I said before, we have the greatest...
But the chairman of the inquiry was also a senior race official.
No, I don't think there's a conflict of interest. I think, you know, I mean, obviously the key objective of the key goal is that we remain very objective about what it is that we're doing. And at the end of the day, the test of that, the proof will be in the proof of the pudding will be in the eating.
Of course, all these people are so much wiser now, but lessons like this get forgotten. Committees change in the yacht club. Attitudes change. The crews who are in this race in 10 years' time won't be still in the race. So history will repeat itself, you'll find.
In Hobart, far from its usual celebrations, the Sydney to Hobart had a sombre finish. The cause of its 6 deaths won't be finally known until the results of a coronial inquiry.
Would you do the race again?
Personally, I wouldn't do it again, no.
Why is that?
I've used up most of my 9 lives.
I'm going next year. I mean, it was a tragic race, and some of the people I knew, and all of the boats I knew, but nevertheless, from our personal point of view, we actually enjoyed the race. Like, it was hard, we sailed well, we got a good result.
You know, you could take a view that it will cause a lot of people to never want to go to Hobart again. Human nature being the way that it is, it might actually increase the appeal of the event.
Storms can't always be predicted, and they can't always be survived. The Sydney to Hobart is a tough race, But in the future, if the race becomes a matter of life and death, shouldn't it be remembered that it is, after all, just a yacht race?
I don't really think any sport has the right to endanger someone's life, particularly if it's a sport. If you're doing it for a living, or if you're doing it, with some absolutely bent twist to achieve something, well, that's your own course. But if you're participating in a sport like sailing or any other sport, I don't think you should be at the mercy of that extreme fury.
I think that this whole drama has a lesson, and the lesson applies equally to the people running the race as it does to those who are participating.
And what is that lesson?
That there are conditions on the sea which are beyond the capability of men to withstand.